So glad I get a chance to share some of what we do out here and why. Biodynamics is pretty important to us, although as I share through the program, we aren't certified. I don't know that we'll ever be certified. We kind of do a hybrid, so I do everything's based on biodynamics, and then it's informed by my herbalist sensibilities, how we treat the land and the animals there. The organization of what I'm going to take you through here, I'm going to show you some of how we're the ways we use biodynamics, and then I'm going to show you the actual practical applied. And I'll start with this is usually my husband gives background slides, so excuse me as I get surprised occasionally by what he's prepared for me. This is some of the backgrounds that I was just given. And I have a Bachelor of Arts from Ohio Wesleyan and apprenticed under Rosemary Gladstar. And I write all over the place. And some of what I write does come up against what you'll see today. And we have founded the Mockingbird Meadows Eclectic Herbal Institute, where we will be teaching biodynamics. Introduction to Steiner. Steiner is who started all of this. And I know you'll hear a lot about him. Hopefully you get to hear about him when we go out to California. This all started in the early 1920s. There were a group of farmers who went to Steiner, and they had noticed that their soil fertility was declining. Their crops weren't growing as well. They were starting out in the fields. Maybe they were germinating, and then they were petering out. Their yields were going down. There was something wrong with the soil, and there were a lot of chemical fertilizers coming to the fore at this time, and so there was kind of a great discussion going on about how we should fix this problem. A group of farmers came to Steiner to ask him to share some of his philosophy about what could be done to improve the crops and make the plants more virile and strong again. And he taught a series of lectures then for these farmers, and that became the book that we know as the Agriculture Lectures. And he went on to write on bees, and there are a number of things out there that are written from an anthroposophic methodology as well. He really took, the way that I understand it is he took all of the intuitive and ancient knowledge, and he kind of organized it and presented it in a clear, concise manner. So I'll have people who come out, as an example, I'll have people come out to the farm and I'll explain some of the methods that we're using to farm. And somebody will be originally from the Caribbean, or someone will be originally from Africa, and they'll say, oh, that's exactly how we farm at home. That's what my grandparents did. So he wasn't necessarily coming up with brand new thought. What he was doing was organizing it in a new way. And a lot of these practices you'll see resonating in cultural ways of dealing with plants and the soil around the world. Anthroposophical, I have a hard time with that. Anthroposophical movement he founded are based on his lectures and his thoughts. He really brought forth the idea of tying together a spirituality and an interaction with our environment, with the soil, with the animals, with the plant. And so a lot of what you'll see in biodynamics is this idea that there is more to it than analyzing the chemicals, the nutrient levels. It's a lot more than just a method. It's a connection. It's a greater spirituality that you'll see. So combination of science and spirituality. On our farm, we do a lot of things in support of biodynamics. One of the things that we do is growing the herbs that are used to make the biodynamic preparations. Biodynamic preparations I'm going to give to you in specific, but you'll hear a lot about that, whether a farm is making their own biodynamic preps, and these are soil and plant applications, whether they're making it or whether they're buying it. We have not progressed to a point where we're making our preparations yet, but the energetics and the importance of the plants being on the farm and feeding the soil just in being there growing, I feel is another level. And so these are some of the plants that are very important in the preps. And we grow all of these on the farm, and some of them we use directly. We will make teas and use directly onto the plants for different issues. And so fresh and dried. Raising bees are one of the big ways that we resonate with biodynamics. STEINER actually predicted our current loss of bees, and it was because at the time there was a rise of how cool it was that we should breed queens. And the queen is the founder of the hive, and at the time beekeepers felt that it was a great advance to be able to control the genetics of the hive, to control whether the hive was kind or aggressive, to cull the herd and really select for queens that may be resistant to a mite or may be very prolific. Her family may be really good at gathering, and so the hives were heavy all the time. STEINER saw a big problem with this because as you select away from biodiversity, you are creating a weakness, and it's unnatural. And the methods, if you ever look into queen rearing, some of it can be really disturbing. We are now where he predicted we would be with the bees, and I believe he was right that a lot of it does come down to the breeding that was going on that became very standard and is still going on today. But it also came down to changing the cell size within the hive and giving the bees a specific cell size upon which they cannot change. And all of the other conventional practices that were in vogue at the time that STEINER was talking, bringing in more and more chemicals into the hive and continually intruding upon the life of the hive. We practice a lot of the standards that are biodynamic. Some of the things that we do, we use the biodynamic prep teas as a base for some of the herbal teas that we use in the hives. And the way that we look at the hive itself is very similar to the way that we look at the soil of our farm. Healthy soil creates more nutrient-dense plants. We know that it's kind of a basis of biodynamics. If we make the soil fully nutrient-laden, the plant is able to access all of that nutrition. If the plant is fully healthy, it is not predated on by bugs or fungus or disease. It is able to thrive. And in the same way we look at the soil of the hive is the comb and the bee herself. And if she is fully healthy, we don't need to think about what we're going to spray or what we're going to add to fight this or that disease or mite, because our goal is the health of the bee, the health of the soil in the hive first. It's a similar philosophy that gets applied across the board. So some of the biodynamic standards in a hive: no foreign substances. You'll see this all the way in gardening under biodynamics as well as beekeeping. You just don't put something there that doesn't belong in nature, that wouldn't normally be there. Bee-made foundation only. We do allow our bees to make most of their comb. No chemicals in the hive or on the comb. Emergency feeding being only honey, again, only what would be natural. You wouldn't want to do something that isn't within that natural system. and we provide lots of forage. Again, we don't strictly adhere to all of these standards. It can be very difficult, even organic or biodynamic, to state that your bees, in this instance, are going to be completely certified as this or that, because they're a wild animal. And we err on the side instead on our farm of leaving them wild and interacting with them in that way as much as possible. One of the other ways that we apply biodynamic principles, and this is actually how I got into biodynamics in the first place, is potentiating our medicines. When I was studying to become an herbalist, I was introduced to STEINER through the notion that we put an energy or an intention into our medicine when we make it. And I now explain this as the chicken soup phenomena. If we were all given the exact same ingredients and we were making them for a different sick member of our own personal family, every single one of our chicken soups are going to come out different. They're going to taste different. They're going to look different. And even though we started with the exact same ingredients, we manipulate them differently. We put our intention. I may be really concerned about my son, and I'm putting my love for my son into that as I'm making it, and my intention for him to get well. This is the magic of making our own medicine at home with plants, is that we can do that chicken soup phenomena with our medicine. And again, the medicinal quality of the herbs we raise is also benefited by the biodynamic practices. Your medicine, the phytochemicals that you find within a plant are going to be affected by the health of the soil. The plant cannot uptake something into its body that isn't there. And so by ensuring that your soil is healthy and has all of the nutrients, you can ensure that when you harvest red clover, it has vitamin C and vitamin A and calcium. It has everything in it that is supposed to be there at very healthful levels by ensuring that your soil is very healthy. Homesteading is another way that we apply biodynamics. A foundational biodynamic principle is that you get as much as you possibly can to maintain the life of everything on the farm from the farm. So it's intended to be kind of a closed loop. You have animals, you want to use their manure to enrich the soil to grow your food, and you also want to grow food, forage for that animal so that it's a closed loop. They're eating from the farm, they're producing soil enrichment, which helps you eat from the farm, and round you go. And homesteading, to me, is also intimately tied with biodynamics, because I believe we've lost a connection to our land. We used to, long ago, see it as much more than just a place to put our seeds down to get our carrots out. Biodynamics really sees it as a mutual relationship. I become the soil of my land. The soil is the foundation of the health of my family. If I take care of the land that I stand on, then it gives me proper nutrition. It impregnates the food and the medicines that I'm making there to keep my family healthy. If I don't care for that land, it isn't able to do that for me, and we are both suffering. So homesteading, to me, when it's tied in with biodynamics, is allowing that relationship that used to be there, that codependence, and here I mean that in a healthy sense, but the codependence that the land needs us to do a job. The land needs us as its legs. The The plants need us as their legs. They can't move about like we do. And if we partner with them, they take care of us. So how do you apply these principles? So putting biodynamics to work. These are the preps. The preps are the basis for how we care for the soil on the farm. The biggies are the 500 and 501. The 500 you'll see being, this is where you'll see pictures that people have of cow horns that are buried in the soil. And generally that's buried, gosh, I haven't actually done it myself yet. I know at Harmony Farm in Dayton does this every year. And I believe that Till, Chef Magdiel in Columbus, downtown Columbus, I believe he is making some of his own biodynamic preps for his kitchen garden as well. And the horn manure is a cow horn that is buried with manure in it. And the burying of the cow horn is potentiating in the same way I potentiate medicine. It's potentiating the nutrients within the manure in the horn. And there's a lot of science that goes behind this. I encourage you to read, if you are a science junkie, I encourage you to read some of the Secrets of the Soil, Secret Life of the Plants. These have a lot of the deep science here. When you're talking about the horn manure, it's the science of the vortex, and it's a physics equation that I won't even venture into explaining. But the shape of that vortex that is exemplified in a cow horn and a tornado it amplifies what is contained within it. So this gets buried for a period of time and then redug, and then you have your horn manure. I don't make any of these preps, so I subscribe to a place called Josephine Porter Institute. The Josephine Porter Institute has a lot of great education, and that's what they do, is making these soil preps. They make all of them, and they make them available to people who buy in almost like a herd share or a community shared agriculture. You buy in at the number of acres that you have, and they send you the amount of preps that you need to care for that acreage. The horn manure goes down to stimulate root growth and humus formation, and it goes down. You can do it in the spring and the fall. Usually it goes before you're putting plants in the ground. The horn silica is a foliar spray to stimulate and regulate leaf growth. As you look down through these biodynamic preps, you'll start to see that they're focused on different nutrient levels. In the same way we buy, well, I don't, but people buy bags of fertilizer that have the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium levels stated on them. This is how biodynamics gets at that similar function, only it's trying to tie in a lot more into just those nutrients. So 500 and 501 go onto the soil and the plant. 502 through 507 are formulations with different herbs that are intended to go into the compost pile itself to increase nutrition of manure or the kitchen scraps or whatever else you're composting. And then horsetail, 508, is a foliar spray. And we actually use horsetail every year. We've got a neighbor down the road who has a large orchard, and we've been caring for his orchard for him for a few years now, and we're maintaining it biodynamically. So every year we're spraying on horsetail and clay in an effort to keep down the fungus and the worm and bug problem. So here's a great example. My husband has been digging out our barn, and that's, you'll see in the lower, let's see if I can use this. This is our horse barn, or not our horse barn. This is our cow and goat barn. And so he's been digging that out, and he's piled up all of the manure here that has been breaking down over the winter. And we will now mound this up all together, and then we will poke in the different herbal preps, 502 through 507, in a pattern throughout to amplify. This would be similar to, I know there are compost invigorators or powders that you can put onto your compost pile that will increase the metabolic function, the breakdown that's going on. This is a similar principle, only you're using herbs that are prepared in the biodynamic way. So composting is really big, and that's a great way for us to continue to improve our soil. Ruby is our it became quite clear why there's just something really settling about a cow once you get it on the property, and her manure is so much better balanced and breaks down nicer and improves the health of the soil. In biodynamics, we got her after she had been treated in the conventional way, I guess I should say. In biodynamic belief, animals, ruminants, are intended to keep their horns. And the horn, as I mentioned before, is very important in making the preps. It's very important in the health of the animal as well. And it's actually an extension of their digestion. So if any of you keep goats or sheep or cows, you hear a lot about bloat, and you just don't tend, if you're not feeding grain and the animals have their horns, you just don't see those same problems. They are incredibly more healthy than their dehorned counterparts. And so I'm sad to say that Ruby lost her horns before we got her, but we keep her pretty well under control. I want to go back to, my husband wanted to make sure that I mentioned, this pile of manure here is just off our kitchen and off our deck. And I can tell you that there is absolutely no smell at all. When he is digging out the barn, there were actually, embarrassingly to say, there were a couple years of manure in that barn. And I was standing in there while he was scooping it, and we were right up on it, and there was just no smell at all. And that's the difference between feeding animals grain versus feeding them what they're intended to eat, the grass and the hay and all of the weeds that we give them as well. So our ruminants, they get the biodynamic herbs too.
Dawn,
Yes.
excuse me, this is Katrinka. Priscilla has a question for you.
Okay.
Priscilla?
Hello. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Do you think that the cow's manure is more beneficial because of their gut biota as opposed to the goats and the...
Well, partially, yes. I think that's possible. I think goat manure is really fabulous. The problem is that cows kind of leave theirs in one spot where it will break down en masse, and I think there may be something to that, as opposed to goats who sprinkle it all over, and there's no real way to retrieve it. Obviously, it's going to be amassed in the barn, but they really sprinkle it all throughout the pasture, and it gets really difficult to get at it. When the manure comes out, the goats are pelleted, much like a deer spoor. And if you've ever seen any studies done on deer spoor and the way they move plants around, it's almost kind of like a protective coating. So I don't know if they're excreting something that is maintaining that shape, and cows are just more, their manure is more available to the elements. I guess those would be my thoughts.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Of course, they're both eating the same things, at least on our farm. So what goes into it should relatively be the same. The difference would be what's going on in their gut. And we have, right now, our goat who's also on the farm, and we don't happen to have a picture of her. She does have her horns, and she just, man, she can pretty much get into just about anything and digest it just fine. So maybe the old adages about goats being able to eat just about everything really only applied to goats that had their horns, because most of the goats I know today are dehorned and they have pretty sensitive digestion. But our soil has taken leaps and bounds toward fertility and health since we brought Ruby on the property. And she's pretty fun to have as well, just personality-wise. So as we're improving the improving the soil, biodynamics does center almost exclusively on the preps. But there are also, it's also allowed to bring on natural rock powders. So you'll see some of the rock phosphates and silica and limestone going on biodynamic farms as well. This is really kind of a recognition that that's what soil is. And if your soil gets too deficient because of, well, like in our case, our property was a section of an old farm field. So it had been farmed forever, and it had been farmed conventionally. So a lot of erosion, a lot of mistreatment with chemical fertilizers had happened, and those chemical fertilizers lock up nutrition in the soil, or they increase certain nutrients to a point that other nutrients aren't able to be accessed. You can't really fix a soil like that without bringing in some of those minerals, and this is where a really good soil test can be helpful. Right now we're operating off of a book called The Intelligent Gardener, which is not a biodynamic text, and there are things within it that would not be acceptable in biodynamics, but his general principle and how to read a soil test is something that I would highly recommend. It is looking at the trace minerals as well as looking at the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. We do ourselves a great disservice when we only look at those components of the soil, because there are so many other components that we need to ensure proper plant growth, proper medicinal components, proper essential oils in our lavender. There's a lot that we need to take into account beyond just the NPK. When you begin to bring in the rock powders to get your soil back into balance, it takes a number of years, because the rock powder, even though it's ground up, rock is intended to slowly release into the soil, to slowly become soil. And that differs from fertilizer, which is intended to, or man-made fertilizer, which is intended to go down on the soil and immediately be taken up into the plant. In biodynamics, again, the focus is on soil improvement and the plant benefits eventually. You're looking long term with biodynamics as opposed to an immediate response or instant gratification. If you improve your soil long term, you're in good shape. If you just feed your plant year after year, you're putting a Band-Aid on it. And so again, this is where it applies back to herbalism for me, because you don't approach, I don't approach my clients with, here, take this herb, and it will magically fix you. The preps are kind of like giving an herbal tea to your soil to keep somebody healthy or a client healthy. But I would never just do that, because that's not appropriate. You have to look at, is that person deficient in calcium? Is there vitamin B deficiency? What are they eating? What's their lifestyle? There's a complete way to look at somebody, a holistic way to look at somebody when we're looking at herbalism. And in the same way, you can't just apply manure or just apply biodynamic preps to a soil. You have to look at your soil holistically as a body, as an entity. And this is where biodynamics really is grounded, this idea that the soil is a body, it is an entity, it is another animal, for lack of a better word, on your farm. And you have to devote time and attention to its health as much as you have to put into your cow or your child, because everything benefits from the ground up if you get the ground right first. So we'll be putting in quite a number of soil amendments in the form of rock powders this year, along with everything else that we do. But it all goes together as a cohesive whole. Ashing is a fun one. We haven't tried this one yet, though my husband is really intrigued about trying it around the hives. You can, this is different than biochar for those of you who are familiar with biochar. Biochar is burning plant matter to become a soil amendment. This is burning plant matter, and I think of Canadian thistle, which is what I wanted to try it on. Burning Canadian thistle and using the ash of the Canadian thistle back onto the soil as a weed preventative. You can do this with insects. As you see, my husband's got his picture there of a skillet of moths. So the moth that we have a problem with around our brassicas, you can create a char, an ash that you put down around your plants. And yes, sorry, the cute little field mouse at the bottom, some people do use the skins of rodents and burn them as a repellent under this ashing practice. We're going to be looking at the thistle application when we try this, simply because I'm not doing the field mice and my husband refuses to do some jobs. Some things are, he draws a line. So companion planting is big in biodynamics, and there's a great book on companion planting. People that have been doing biodynamics for a long time have been recording their benefits, their failures, and putting them into a database. And as we become members of the Biodynamic Farming and Gardening Association, you gain access to all of this research that's been done all over the planet. And companion planting in biodynamics isn't just about what happens above the soil. It isn't just about chamomile and your brassicas, although I do that one. Chamomile and your brassicas will deter that the white cabbage fly. But biodynamic companion planting is also about what's going on beneath the soil. So the nitrogen exchange, the nitrogen fixers that are great next to a plant that needs more nitrogen, the phytochemicals, the benefits that we're able to harvest a plant for in the human body can also be benefited in the soil. It's not just golden seal. When we use golden seal as an antiviral, in our bodies. It's also an antiviral in the soil. It's a phytochemical that goes into us, into the plant, and down below. So we can begin to think about our companion planting in a much larger sense. Some plants, Canadian thistle, as an example, is breaking up hardpan. Burdock goes very, very deep into the subsoil and is capable of bringing nutrition that has been lost from the subsoil, that has leached down into the, it's been lost in the topsoil. Bringing nutrition that's leached down into the subsoil and been trapped, burdock brings it back up to the topsoil. We can use the weeds in our gardens in a companion planting methodology, knowing that they are talented at fixing different nutrients. So I didn't put this on the slide, but weeds on our farm are big companion plants. Dandelion can be an amazing companion plant if you know when it needs to be pulled and added to the compost pile rather than blooming and keeping your plants from performing properly. We put comfrey in our orchard to crowd out the grass and ensure that the apple trees can keep their roots shallow and enjoy the mycorrhizal relationships and the low nitrogen transfer. One of my favorite companions are, I plant a triple row with parsley, with basil, okra, and peppers. And the resulting performance that I get from those plants by putting them side by side in a row like that is amazing. Some of you may have heard about companion plantings such as basil with tomatoes or borage with tomatoes. Parsley and tomatoes and asparagus are a companion planting that is common in biodynamics. And of course, any kind of alliums with roses. In this picture, you see, wow, every time I look at this, I blank on the name. Cosmos, there we go. I love Cosmos with my tomatoes. It is a really nice pairing. And getting to access all of this information, there are plants that can help deter insects or fungal diseases, to improve the soil, to make you can put a little bit of chamomile with your peppermint, and your peppermint, anything with a volatile oil like that will be more strongly impregnated with volatile oils. Lots of things like that within biodynamics that really looks at what the relationship is between the soil and the plants that are growing together. The biodynamic calendar is a big thing that we go by. We try really hard to plant, cultivate, harvest, and preserve our food by this calendar. And this is where people start to get lost into the occult nature of, they start to see this as a problem. This is really, for me, I was able to get my mind around the other energetics that are coming at the earth by understanding gravity. We all accepted that there is this force that is on us as we're on planet Earth called gravity. It's what keeps us attached to the ground and not floating off into space. And we all accept that in grade school. Biodynamics as a thought process and interacting with our natural world accepts that there are other forces that are being acted on us because we get closer or farther away from other bodies out in space. So stars, planets, the moon, the sun, and we don't have names for them, but it's the same principle as gravity. It's a force that we accept, and there are forces that are acting on us in other ways. Our grandparents' grandparents' grandparents didn't really have a name for that. They just knew that there were some days that it was better to plant a flower versus a leaf versus a root plant, or better days to harvest those things. They were more in tune with whether it was a full moon or a new moon. And sometimes they were aware of where we were in the astrological year, so what constellation was present in the sky and what that meant for where we were in harvest or planting. This calendar that is on here, because I have absolutely no concept of what's going on astrologically on any given day, except if you ask me whether it's a new moon or a full moon, I generally know when that is. But all this other stuff is just way above my ability to comprehend. So I have a calendar, and you can actually get it off of Amazon. There's another one that comes out of the Biodynamic Foundation, but I like this one because it's got pretty drawings and fun articles to read. And as you can see, this is June, so today is Tuesday the 3rd, and the way to read this is, let's see, right now it is grayed out. It means that where we are in rotation and where the heavenly bodies that are around us, it is not favorable to do anything outside right now. At 2 o'clock, it says fruit. From then on, actually all the way through tomorrow until 10 o'clock at night, it's fruit. It is a favorable time to plant, to weed around, to harvest or preserve fruit. Does anybody have any questions on this part? Anybody puzzling?
I don't have any hands raised at this point.
All right. We try really hard to stick to this. The way that I understand this, what makes sense to my sciencey brain, is that the forces that are acting on us as we move through the constellations and get closer and farther from other things out in space is that it is allowing better uptake of the appropriate nutrient. So we know nitrogen, for instance, it was on Monday from 1 a.m. to 7 p.m. was a leaf time. Wherever we were, and whatever this says over here, wherever we were, the forces that were acting on the earth were making nitrogen more available. And nitrogen is something that we know feeds plants' ability to produce copious amounts of leaf material. This is how I am able to apply this knowledge. Again, in some cultures, there's no need for my sciencey brain to suss that out. My grandparents just knew this kind of stuff. And over years and years and years and years and years of people cataloging this information and seeing what happens when they plant or harvest or cultivate around these times, they have recorded different benefits or failures with plants based on what has been done with this calendar. And especially, especially in the situation of preservation, we know that if you're harvesting a plant on a favorable day, like on a fruit day, you're harvesting tomatoes on a fruit day, we have seen greater keeping powers for those tomatoes. Those tomatoes stay viable longer on your counter when you harvest them on that day. That said, here in Ohio, we have crazy weather, and it may be a leaf day, and I may really want to put in seeds for my lettuce on that day, but it may be pouring that day. So we try really hard to stick to this calendar, but it is not our end-all be-all, at least on this farm. There are other farms that do really stick to this calendar. We try hard to. When we don't, we just we try and cultivate. If we have to plant on a day that isn't favorable, then we cultivate on days that are favorable. Collecting herbs can be very difficult to stick to one specific time because, like roses, I have to pick them every single day. So I have noted different days where I get stronger scent. If I pick on a flower day, I get stronger scent. If I pick comfrey on a day that happens to be fruit, it will smell the loft up with cucumber like you wouldn't believe. But I pick it on another day that's not fruit and I won't get that smell. So we have noted some really interesting things with this. Depending on where your level is on this, this can be a fun curiosity, or it can be not your cup of tea, or you could get really into it. We're kind of somewhere in the middle. CSAs are big in biodynamics. Reaching out into the community. Our Eclectic Herbal Institute does native plant research and education on beekeeping, and we partner with the community, and this is all in keeping with our biodynamic methods on the farm and the biodynamic sensibility that not only are we a closed loop within the farm, but we are a part of the circle in the community at large. Are there any questions?
At this point, I have no shows of hands, Dawn. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a little bit of a lag. Priscilla?
Hi, Dawn?
Yes. Hello?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Priscilla, did you have a question?
She's unmuted, so she should be able to.
Hello, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good. How do the farms around you interact or react to your biodynamic approaches, and are they supportive and all of that?
We are completely surrounded with hardcore conventional agriculture. They have alternately responded with hostility, some curiosity, and I think that has been just from the kind of organic movement. People assume, at least in this community, they have assumed that anybody who was different was hostile to what they were doing. That really isn't our thing. This is what we do, and as I don't want anybody to come onto my land and tell me how I'm going to farm, I don't feel it's my business to tell them how to farm. So as that has kind of gotten more well-known, I think we've gotten more curiosity and less hostility. What we do isn't really, it's not easy to see. They just see me kind of picking things constantly rather than running a big tractor. And so, and we have a big labyrinth in our front yard. So we get lots of looks as the farmers go by. We haven't had, the community has not like signed up for classes or wanted to come learn or really examined us, but we have lots of curiosity. Unfortunately, we live, I think, maybe 5 miles up the road from Scott's World Headquarters. So it's not really an environment. We aren't invited to a lot of things out here. Our community that we interact with is more in Worthington and Clintonville and Granville and Grandview, more into Columbus, and less right in our own backyard, which is kind of sad, but it is what it is.
Dawn, Susan Lichty has a comment for you.
Yes.
I think. Oh. She sent me a little note saying it was fabulous and thank you for the presentation.
Good.
Do we have anyone else that has a question or a comment at this point? Okay. I see no hands raised. So if you'd like to reach Dawn, this is her website, mockingbirdmeadows.com. And she's also a member of HSA, so you can look in the directory and get her email address, unless you want to give it to everybody. And
anybody, yeah, dcombs@mockingbirdmeadows.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate this. This was our first venture into a webinar with the HSA members, and everyone's sending me little messages that says it was fabulous. They enjoyed your presentation very much, and thank you.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for your time, everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Everybody wave goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Dawn. I'm going to end the presentation.
All righty.
Thank you.
Thank you.